On a quiet September afternoon in 1996, 15-year-old Danielle Houchins left her home in Belgrade, Montana, and was never seen alive again. Her disappearance triggered a local search effort that grew more desperate with each passing hour. Days later, a shocking discovery near the Gallatin River would turn a missing persons report into a homicide investigation. What followed was a decades-long silence. No arrests, no suspects, no answers. But in 2021, an unlikely breakthrough emerged from a lab thousands of miles away. Using DNA preserved for over 2 decades, forensic specialists uncovered a hidden trail that led investigators to a man who had never once appeared in the original case file. What they found would rewrite the entire story and bring the case to a dramatic and irreversible conclusion. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us.
Danielle Marie Houchins, a 15-year-old high school student from Belgrade, Montana, lived in a small town west of Bozeman. She lived with her family in a residential area near the local high school and was known among classmates and teachers as a friendly, inquisitive, and thoughtful person. She studied at the Belgrade Secondary School, where she was in the 2nd grade. Her academic performance was steady, and she participated in school activities, although she did not take an active part in extracurricular programs. Teachers remembered her as a respectful and responsible woman. Her friends described her as quiet but loyal, with a small, close-knit group of peers. It was reported that she was not involved in any disciplinary incidents or known risky behavior. Danielle's home life seemed stable. She lived with her parents and at least one sibling in a home where there had been no previous calls about law enforcement intervention or reports of domestic problems. Danielle never ran away or got into risky situations. She had no criminal record, and there were no open Social Security or absenteeism cases involving her. On the afternoon of September 21, 1996, Danielle was last seen leaving her home. According to numerous confirmed sources, she planned to go for a walk, or perhaps meet someone in the Cameron Bridge Road area, in the countryside by the Gallatin River, known as a common vacation spot. It was not uncommon for local youth to visit the area for fishing, walking, or socializing. However, no eyewitness accounts have been confirmed that she met anyone that day, and her family has not been informed of her exact destination. Danielle did not return home that evening, and the next morning, her family reported her disappearance to the Belgrade Police Department. At the time of her disappearance, she was dressed in casual clothes suitable for a warm September day. She did not have any personal belongings, such as a wallet or backpack, with her. Her bike, if she used it that day, was never found. Early attempts to find her included searching for local law enforcement and volunteers, including patrolling along roads and wooded areas near the river. There was no immediate evidence of foul play, and her status remained missing for several days. Law enforcement agencies interviewed friends, classmates, neighbors, and family members. No one reported receiving any messages from Danielle after her disappearance. Her school records confirm that she did not attend any classes after September 21st. Her name and photo were circulated in local news outlets and flyers posted throughout Gallatin County. Tips were received, but they did not lead to reliable observations. After several days of no contact, investigators began to suspect that Danielle might have been the victim of a crime. Her family reiterated that she had no reason to run away and left behind all of her personal belongings. A statewide warning was issued, and local law enforcement coordinated with the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. Despite these efforts, no significant leads were found immediately after her disappearance. At the time, the case did not receive much coverage in the national media. Local media have consistently provided updates, but without a body found, a suspect, or physical evidence, the investigation has stalled. The case remained open, but was inactive due to a lack of leads. The local sheriff's department distributed annual reminders in an attempt to get new clues. Danielle Houchins' name was eventually added to databases of unsolved cases, but her whereabouts remained unknown for several years. On the morning of September 27, 1996, 6 days after Danielle Houchins was officially reported missing, her body was found in a remote wetland near the Gallatin River in Gallatin County, Montana. The site was located near Cameron Bridge Road, in a sparsely developed area characterized by open fields, coastal thickets, and minimal residential activity. The region is located northwest of Bozeman and less than 10 miles from Danielle's hometown of Belgrade. The discovery was made by a local resident who came to the area for a personal vacation unrelated to the investigation. Noticing an unusual presence in the water and bushes, the man immediately left the area and contacted the emergency services. Gallatin County Sheriff's deputies were the first to arrive at the scene. The area was protected for 45 minutes, and access was restricted to authorized personnel. Officers initiated standard killing protocols, including perimeter cordoning, forensic photography, and systematic documentation of environmental features. The body was about 40 feet from the riverbank, partially submerged and hidden by tall grass and cattails. Initial assessments by officers who arrived at the scene revealed no visible signs of fighting in the immediate vicinity. No tire tracks, dragging marks, or unusual ground disturbances were observed. Portable GPS was used to record the coordinates of the recovery site. The victims' remains were dressed, although they were not accompanied by any personal belongings. No wallet, ID card, or shoes were found nearby. Officers noted that vegetation had grown around the body parts, suggesting that it had remained in place for several days. Water levels in the wetlands have dropped slightly since the date of Danielle's disappearance, which may have contributed to the delay in visibility and subsequent discovery. Initially, identification was based on physical characteristics and a description of clothing provided by family members. The items matched the clothes Danielle was last seen wearing. Due to the condition of the remains, the forensic medical examination was accelerated. Within 48 hours, the Montana State Forensic Laboratory in Missoula compared dental records and officially identified the body as Danielle Marie Houchins. The autopsy was carried out by the State Forensic Medical Service. The official report established that the death was murder. The specific means by which the murder took place have not been disclosed to the public. The relevant sections of the autopsy report were later edited in a version published for media inquiries and public records. However, it was confirmed that no firearms or related shells were found. The resulting injuries were described as intentional and incompatible with either natural causes or accidental injury. Toxicological testing was also conducted, but the results were not included in the final public release. Following an initial forensic examination, a full forensic team was dispatched to the recovery site. Soil samples were taken from below and around the remains. A water sample was taken for analysis for trace contaminants or foreign biological material. Several hair and fiber samples were removed from the victim's clothing and surrounding foliage. These items were catalogued, registered according to the chain of custody, and taken to the State Forensic Laboratory for preservation. In 1996, DNA testing options were limited, and none of the samples matched the FBI's Joint DNA Index System, CODIS. The materials were stored in cold rooms to await future technological developments. There was a lack of infrastructure in the vicinity, such as surveillance cameras or roadway monitoring systems. This place was not very socially active, and there was no commercial real estate nearby. Law enforcement agencies examined private homes within a 2-mile radius. Officers interviewed landowners, ranch workers, and local utility crews who had been working in the area during the week after the disappearance. No one reported seeing Danielle or any suspicious persons or vehicles. One of the property owners recalled hearing a car noise late at night on September 21st, but could not give a description. Sightings have been recorded, but cannot be confirmed.
At the time of discovering the information, the Belgrade Police Department had transferred full jurisdiction over the case to the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. The Montana Department of Justice was also notified and sent a liaison officer to oversee the progress of the case and interagency communications. The case was immediately covered in the bulletin of Montana law enforcement agencies, and then in the regional media. Flyers, media reports, and community bulletins have been distributed for weeks. No real suspects were identified. On October 3, 1996, the Sheriff's Office held a public briefing confirming the discovery and classification of the death as homicide, but declined to provide further details. Between October 1996 and March 1997, more than 100 public reports were received on the case, sent by hotline, mail, and anonymous community messages. Each clue was recorded, checked, and studied. None of the information obtained led to the identification of the suspect or material evidence. The researchers compared these versions with existing records, but were unable to identify any effective versions. The clothes found on the victim were sent for fiber comparison and hidden fingerprint testing. The results were inconclusive. Soil samples and environmental swabs were preserved, but no further evidence linking the scene to a specific person or object was provided. Despite extensive fieldwork, investigators have not been able to determine how Danielle arrived at the scene, whether she was transported by car, whether there was a murder scene, or just where the body was left. By the end of 1997, the case had reached an impasse. None of the suspects have been named, no one has been arrested, and the initial evidence has been fully processed using existing tools available to law enforcement. In early 1998, the case was marked as inactive. Physical evidence, including all biological samples, was officially archived. The materials were stored in the Montana State Forensic Laboratory, under climate control conditions, with full documentation of handling and storage protocols. The dossier remained available to law enforcement officials only upon special request.
Between 1998 and 2019, the case was officially dormant. However, periodic internal reviews were conducted by the Gallatin County Unsolved Cases, a small unit formed in the early 2000s to oversee unsolved serious crimes in the region, known witnesses. A recommendation was made to preserve all biological materials and wait for the development of forensic technology. Following the success of several high-profile unsolved cases using forensic genetic genealogy, Gallatin County Sheriff Dan Springer authorized a reevaluation of Danielle Houchins' case. 4 biological samples collected during the initial extraction in 1996 were selected for extensive testing. The Sheriff's Office partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a private DNA firm with experience in law enforcement genealogy cases. The samples were reprocessed using next-generation sequencing. This marked the beginning of a significant breakthrough. In 2021, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office initiated a retrial for the murder of Danielle Houchins using advanced DNA testing technology. This included a formal collaboration with Parabon Nanolabs, a private laboratory specializing in genetic genealogy. The goal was to extract and analyze previously archival biological samples collected from the victim's body in 1996. Among the surviving materials were multiple strands of hair. Earlier trials were inconclusive due to technological limitations in the 1990s. However, the new techniques allowed the researchers to create a viable DNA profile from one of the samples. This profile was absent from the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, and did not match any known criminal or arrestee. Parabon Nanolabs used a technique known as forensic genetic genealogy. The process involved uploading the suspect's DNA profile to a publicly available genealogy database that allowed law enforcement to access it. Using family tree reconstruction and pedigree mapping, the researchers identified a cluster of people genetically related to an unknown male profile. Genetic coincidences led to the emergence of the family in southwestern Montana. After months of genealogical work and DNA triangulation, the profile was narrowed down to one person: Paul Edwin Hutchinson, born in 1969 and living in Dillon, Montana, at the time of identification. Previously, he was not listed in any criminal database. He had no arrest records and was not previously known to Gallatin County law enforcement. In early 2023, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office launched an undercover investigation into Hutchinson's biography. The observation was carried out with the aim of obtaining a direct DNA sample without public confrontation. The discarded item, which is believed to contain Hutchinson's saliva, was collected in accordance with state law. This sample was sent for comparative tests. The Montana State Forensic Laboratory has confirmed a complete DNA match between the item collected from Hutchinson and the profile developed from the evidence in the Danielle Houchins case. Based on this result, Hutchinson was classified as the prime suspect. Investigators scheduled a personal interview. On July 22, 2023, Hutchinson was contacted and voluntarily agreed to speak with law enforcement. The interview was conducted in Dillon and lasted less than 2 hours. According to official reports, Hutchinson did not admit any involvement in the crime. He denied knowing the victim or being in the Cameron Bridge area in 1996, including sweating, fidgeting, and avoiding eye contact when shown a photo of Danielle Houchins. After the interview, law enforcement began preparing a formal case to present to the Gallatin County prosecutor for possible charges. A second interview has been scheduled, and further supporting evidence is being collected. On the morning of July 23, 2023, less than 24 hours after the initial interview, the emergency dispatch office in Dillon received a 911 call from Hutchinson's home. Upon arrival, rescuers found Hutchinson dead. It was confirmed that the cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Firearms were found at the scene, and no evidence of foul play by others was found. Subsequent DNA analysis of Hutchinson using a buccal swab confirmed a definitive match to a profile from the 1996 crime scene. Other suspects have not been publicly named. At the time of writing, investigators have not disclosed any known relationship or previous contact between Hutchinson and Danielle Houchins. There is no confirmed evidence that they knew each other. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office classified the case as a closed homicide investigation after DNA confirmation. No further charges are expected in connection with the death of the suspect. Following the death of Paul Edwin Hutchinson on July 23, 2023, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office began uncovering legal and procedural steps confirming his involvement in the murder of Danielle Houchins in 1996. A full forensic comparison was made between the DNA profile obtained from Hutchinson and the previously preserved evidence collected from the victim's body. The Montana State Forensic Laboratory has published a final report confirming a complete DNA match. The investigation team studied the history of the suspect, employment records, known addresses, and travel schemes. Hutchinson was a Montana resident at the time of the incident and lived within 100 miles of the crime scene. There was no record of him ever being questioned during the initial investigation, and his name was not mentioned in any witness statements collected during the initial investigation. No connection between Hutchinson and the victim was found in school records, phone logs, or community affiliation. According to property and employment records, Hutchinson lived in Dillon, Montana in 1996 and worked in a position related to regional travel. His trip for work could have led him to find himself near Belgrade on the specified date. However, there is no documentary evidence that he must have been in the area at the time. Investigators found no journal entries, letters, or digital messages that could clarify his motives or provide additional context for his presence near the crime scene. Following standard practice, law enforcement conducted interviews with individuals known to be close to Hutchinson in both 1996 and 2023. None of them reported any knowledge or suspicion of his involvement in the crime. He had no history of violent crime, arrests, or psychiatric institutions. Public records indicate a lack of background, and there have been no restraining orders or civil lawsuits. As soon as the forensic examination linking Hutchinson to the murder was confirmed, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office held a press conference in August 2023. At the briefing, they announced that the case of Danielle Houchins had been solved with DNA evidence and that the identified suspect had died. No other persons of interest were named. The statement was the first public confirmation in more than 2 decades that law enforcement had identified the perpetrator in the case. The Sheriff's Office also recognized the contributions of outside partners in forensics, including Parabon Nanolabs, and paid tribute to advances in forensic genetic genealogy. They said that without this technology, the case would likely have gone unsolved, especially in the Belgrade and Dillon communities. News agencies across Montana and several national media outlets have published summaries of the decision in the case. Public records do not show any civil lawsuits or claims filed against Hutchinson's estate after his death. The Houchins family issued a brief statement through law enforcement, asking for confidentiality and expressing relief that the case was de facto over. The Montana Department of Justice has officially reclassified the case as resolved by identification. No additional criminal cases were initiated. The file remains accessible to law enforcement in accordance with restricted access protocols and is not considered active. This case is now often cited as an example of how archival biological evidence, if properly preserved, can lead to successful identification decades later. It is also mentioned in the forensic literature, which discusses the role of genealogical databases, other than CODIS, in solving unsolved cases. After obtaining a confirmed match through forensic genetic testing, the Gallatin County investigation team moved to the confirmation phase, designed to strengthen the evidentiary chain linking archival biological material recovered from the victim's remains in 1996 to the male identified through genealogy analysis in 2023. While the DNA match provided scientific confirmation, the standard of investigation required additional supporting evidence to officially close the case with full institutional certainty. The identified person, whose name never surfaced either during the initial investigation or in subsequent reviews, was discovered after a long period of bioinformatic mapping and triangulation. Using publicly available genealogy data, ancestry records, and demographic statistics, the researchers created a profile based on ancestry that consistently pointed to a single male. He was confirmed to reside in southwestern Montana, and his personal history showed no previous arrests, convictions, or known ties to individuals listed in any criminal or civil Montana databases. His name did not appear in any of the original records of denunciations, testimony, or interviews conducted during the 1996 to 1998 investigation. After the official identification of the person, law enforcement agencies began a secret investigation. For weeks, officers secretly collected additional data, including historical records of vehicle ownership, driver's license renewals, previous employment, and property lease history dating back to the mid-1990s. This information has been correlated with known time and geographic markers since Danielle's disappearance. Although there were no direct records confirming his presence in Gallatin County on September 21, 1996, the subject did have working records indicating that he traveled regularly to southwestern Montana during that year. Some addresses related to his residential history were within reasonable reach of the Cameron Bridge area. Investigators examined archival data from telecommunications providers, although restrictions in document retention policies since the 1990s have limited the availability of historical information about the location of cellular stations. Despite this, circumstantial evidence indicated that the subject's occupation and access to transport could well have allowed him to be in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene undetected. Having conducted sufficient research, the investigators decided to conduct a voluntary interview not related to deprivation of liberty. The strategy was to engage the suspect in a collaborative effort to assess behavioral responses and further substantiate the results of the forensic examination. The interview was conducted in mid-2023 at the regional office in Dillon, Montana. The suspect was not under arrest and agreed to speak without a lawyer. The session lasted about 2 hours and was recorded in full, in the presence of 2 detectives. During the interrogation, the suspect denied his involvement in the case. He stated that he did not know the name Danielle Houchins, did not remember visiting the Cameron Bridge area, and could not explain how his DNA could be related to the evidence obtained from the 15-year-old victim. Investigators reported that his behavior changed markedly when he was presented with the case file. He showed signs of physical arousal, including increased sweating, repeated face-to-face contact, and inconsistent eye contact. These remarks were recorded in the interrogation record, although none of the suspect's statements constituted a confession or legal admission of involvement. After the interrogation, law enforcement agencies carried out a court-sanctioned procedure to obtain a second DNA sample for direct comparison. A buccal blister swab was taken from the subject and sent to the Montana State Forensic Laboratory, where it was compared to the original profile obtained from the 1996 evidence. The result confirmed a complete genetic match, confirming the initial identification beyond reasonable doubt. In parallel, the investigation team sent formal information requests to educational institutions, employers, residential property managers, and utility providers to determine whether any documentation could establish a previous link between the suspect and the victim. A thorough search of school registers, medical records, and address registers was conducted. No records were found that the suspect and Danielle Houchins visited the same facilities, lived in adjacent premises, or visited the same doctors. It was not possible to establish any known correspondence, family connection, or connection with a third party. The investigators concluded that there was no established relationship between the 2 persons. While legal documentation was in the process and formal charges were being prepared, law enforcement was in the final stages of obtaining an arrest warrant. The plan provided for the organization of armor, pretrial detention, and the initiation of a criminal case. However, before any action could be taken, events unfolded that led to an abrupt end to the trial. The morning after the interview, July 23, 2023, Dillon's emergency services received a 911 call from the suspect's home. Officers from Beaverhead County arrived at the scene and found the suspect dead. A preliminary assessment indicated a gunshot wound. A firearm registered to the deceased was found at the scene. There were no other people. A forensic medical examination concluded that the cause of death was suicide as a result of a single self-inflicted gunshot wound. No traces of foul play were found, and there was no suspicion of criminal activity at the scene other than the act itself. In accordance with the protocol, a post-mortem DNA sample was obtained and independently sent for laboratory confirmation. The test once again showed a complete match with the DNA profile extracted from the original forensic evidence. With this conclusive result, law enforcement proceeded to formally close the case. In August 2023, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office held a press briefing to announce the results. That the case of Danielle Houchins was solved through cutting-edge forensic genealogy and DNA analysis. The identified suspect died. No other persons were investigated. The case was reclassified as settled by identification, and the investigation was archived. Authorities highlighted the role of preserved biological material, meticulous documentation, and new forensic techniques in solving the case, which has been dormant for more than 25 years. They recognized the contributions of Parabon Nanolabs and the Montana State Forensic Science Laboratory, as well as the foresight of investigators in 1996, who ensured that evidence was properly stored for long-term viability. The outcome of the case was recorded in national databases of unsolved cases, including the FBI's VICAP system and the National System of Missing and Unidentified Persons, NAMUS, and the details of the decision were provided for educational purposes. No civil lawsuits or additional claims were filed against the deceased's property. The Houchins family released a brief written statement through law enforcement, expressing relief and appreciation and asking for respect for their privacy. After the identity of the person whose DNA matched the biological material found on Danielle Houchins was confirmed through laboratory analysis, Gallatin County law enforcement began officially moving the case from an unsolved case to an active prosecution. The verified coincidence allowed the case to proceed to the indictment stage, during which the law enforcement authorities, in consultation with the district attorney's office, assessed the sufficiency of the available evidence to substantiate the criminal charge. An interagency expert panel was convened to ensure that all investigative elements met the threshold required to prosecute under Montana's revised first-degree homicide laws. The Gallatin County investigation team began organizing the case file into categories of evidence, including exhibits found at the scene, forensic reports, interrogation transcripts, surveillance notes, and background checks. A verified DNA profile was listed as the main exhibit. Additional materials, such as the suspect's behavioral reactions during voluntary interrogation, were classified as corroborating documentation. Phone call metadata, vehicle registration history, and historical address records were collected through official requests to government agencies, while financial data was obtained through subpoenas issued under judicial supervision. The arrest warrant was in the final stages of preparation. Law enforcement officials confirmed that they intend to turn over the collected case materials to the Gallatin County District Attorney's Office within 1 week of receiving DNA confirmation. The goal was to bring charges under the Montana Code with comments section 45-5-102 relating to intentional homicide. The indictment plan also included possible secondary charges related to the concealment or destruction of evidence, pending further analysis of the suspect's activities after the date of the crime. The decision to postpone the public announcement of the impending arrest was strategic. Authorities chose not to disclose information until all legal documentation had been finalized, citing concerns about procedural integrity and the potential risk of escape. The suspect, Paul Edwin Hutchinson, was not under observation after the initial interrogation because he voluntarily cooperated and did not try to evade contact with investigators. At the time, he was not subject to any travel restrictions and remained at his residence in Dillon, Montana. Law enforcement officers were engaged in planning the logistics of the detention. The arrest was to be made without media involvement, with plans for immediate transportation to the Gallatin County Detention Center pending indictment. A judicial officer was temporarily appointed to preside over the first hearing. In the meantime, investigators continued to gather additional evidence to corroborate the case file, including geographical mapping of historical travel routes, vehicle inspection logs, and firearm records. However, on July 23, 2023, less than 24 hours after the initial interrogation of the suspect, a 911 call came from Hutchinson's home. Rescuers from Beaverhead County were dispatched to the scene. Upon arrival, they found Hutchinson dead from what was later confirmed to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A firearm registered to Hutchinson was found nearby. The scene was processed by district investigators and a forensic expert. No evidence of forced entry or involvement of third parties has been documented. The house was taken under guard and photographed, and an official death certificate was filed within 72 hours. In accordance with the protocol, a buccal swab was taken after the autopsy and transferred to the Montana State Forensic Laboratory. This second sample was tested against a forensic profile developed from biological evidence by Danielle Houchins. The result confirmed a complete genetic match, providing definitive confirmation that Hutchinson was the source of the DNA discovered in 1996. Because the suspect died and the accomplices were not identified, the Gallatin County District Attorney's Office issued a notice of legal closure. In an official public statement released on August 2, 2023, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office confirmed that the homicide investigation had been completed through a forensic medical examination. The statement explains that criminal proceedings on the death of the identified suspect will not be conducted. The case was officially reclassified as resolved by identification, which is used when a prosecutor's decision becomes controversial due to the death of a person against whom the charge was being prepared. The Sheriff's Office praised the joint efforts of local law enforcement, state forensic laboratories, and private sector partners, such as Parabon Nanolabs. Officials stressed that the resolution of the case demonstrated the long-term value of preserving evidence and interagency cooperation. They also noted that this result would not have been possible without advances in forensic science, in particular the adoption of forensic genetic genealogy as a complement to traditional CODIS-based DNA matching. The decision in the Houchins case was recorded in national databases, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the FBI's Violent Crime Arrest Program. He was noted in internal law enforcement bulletins as an example of successfully resolving unsolved cases without arrest. Investigative techniques were submitted for inclusion in regional training programs focused on the long-term investigation of unsolved homicides. Finally, Gallatin County Victim Services representatives made direct contact with the surviving members of the Danielle Houchins family. They were notified of the completion of the investigation and had access to official documentation upon request. The family issued a brief public statement through law enforcement channels, acknowledging the result and expressing gratitude for the perseverance of those involved. No further public comment was forthcoming, and the family asked for confidentiality. Since then, the decision in the case has been referenced in statewide discussions about funding for unsolved cases, recommendations for preserving evidence, and law enforcement policy on non-CODIS DNA strategies.